Hi, and welcome to Dani After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, we have a very special guest with us. We have Zack Kopp of campelasticity.com, and he has served time as a freelance writer, a citizen journalist, website editor, and musician. He is known for his books on the beats, Denver, and his reviews of books and music. His website, campelasticity.com, features links to many of his interviews and various works. With a new book in the works that is coming out very, very soon in the near future, it is with great pleasure that I welcome Zack Kopp to Dani After Dark. Hi, Zack.
Hi, Dani. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing very well. It's a crazy world. I'm going along as I've been going. I'm trying not to let anything knock me off my path.
That is excellent advice that I think all of us need to take right now.
Yeah, right?
So I'm very excited to have you on here. So I know we emailed a little bit back and forth of some of your works, and we were discussing about your time as a freelance writer. So I think just to start off, how did you and when did you get into writing?
Well, my parents were both writers and professors, so I sort of grew up surrounded by books and the idea of, artistry, writing as art. And I just sort of decided from day one to be that guy. And I've written a lot of books and I've made some progress as a writer, but now that AI is coming to blows with all creative avenues. I'm starting to look around for a new way to present myself. But it's been a lifelong thing with me.
Awesome. So what were your parents professors in? Just wondering how that would have shaped you wanting to be a writer.
Well, I think they were both American literature. My mother had a little bit of Old English literature. She went to Cambridge. My dad went to Yale. I don't think it was the academic thing that I was identifying with. They both had a flirtation with the '70s kind of poetry buzz when everyone was writing poetry, and it was sort of an outgrowth of the counterculture. And that's what I identified with, mostly about my father. He wrote, I think, 4 books of poetry, and I read all those when I was a little kid, and that was the beginning of that impulse in me, I suppose.
That's so cool. That is so cool. I did not know that.
And then I wanted to be a writer, an artist of words, right? And then I found that they would only really pay me if I wrote articles and interviews. So I got for several years pretty heavily into freelance writing and interviewing people and writing some book reviews.
So when you did first start doing that, like what were the types of topics you were covering and the types of people you were interviewing?
Well, my first 2 freelance writing projects are like very relevant, I think, to our show today. The first one I went into, it's a little bit of a long story. It's got a few twists and turns. I'll try to keep it fairly concise. Everyone's heard of the idea that, Jim Morrison might have faked his death. You never know. You never know. Anybody who dies who's a celebrity these days is generally accused of having faked their death or relocated, changed their identity. I just thought that'll be an interesting thing to investigate as my first freelance writing article, and I'm going to establish a persona as a freelance writer who's investigating, these weird things. So there was a rancher in Oregon named Gerald Pitts. You may have heard some of this story, I'm not sure. And Gerald may have died, and God rest him, I'm not sure. His website's not online anymore. It was called U.S. Rodeos West. And he said he had found Jim Morrison. He had encountered Jim Morrison, and he was now a rodeo cowboy. And he was going to be making he did in fact star in him. I think it was called Redeemed, a movie that Gerald Pitts produced. Forgive me if I'm wrong about the title. And it was a long drawn out article there about Gerald Pitts and the rodeo cowboy who turned out to be Jim Morrison. I thought, this is where I'll begin my investigation. So I was a little nervous, but I worked myself up to make the call. I dialed the number. I was ready to ask the questions. I got an answering machine, and it said, U.S. Rodeos West is out of business or can't take your call at the moment. So I thought, all right, well, I'll write about that. So that was my first article. I look into the idea. I found out the rodeo cowboy in question, and I know that this guy has passed away. As James Lawyer was his name, and he was married to a woman named Marcia Lawyer. I read a book by another freelance writer, freelance journalist, investigator of conspiracies named Adriana Rubio, and it was called the Jim Morrison Manual Case, I think was the name of her book. She went rather deeply into the Gerald Pitts story, and she had come to the verdict that Gerald Pitts was not to be trusted, and he was just out for money, and it wasn't really Jim Morrison. I never met any of these people. I don't know one way or the other. But that made for my first article. It was pretty lively. It was pretty interesting. And I'm ready to go into the second movement of the story. How am I doing on time?
Oh, you're doing great.
Okay, so the next thing I found out about was that Jim Morrison had a sound-alike erstwhile son named Cliff Morrison, guy who claimed to be Jim Morrison's son. There's no proof, but the guy sounds exactly like him. And his album was called No Peaking, like K-N-O-W, peaking, P-E-A-K-I-N-G, some kind of drug reference probably. And it was very listenable, and it really made me think, gosh, there might be something to this. And I contacted his former manager. Now, the interesting thing about Cliff Morrison and Floyd Bocox is that they've been in and out of association with each other over the years. And when I called Floyd or contacted him, they were on the outs. And Floyd was telling me, I don't think he is Jim Morrison's son, but the guy you should really look into is Uncle Al. And I said, Uncle Al, who's that? Oh, Jim Morrison's brother-in-law, Alan Graham. He was present at the deaths of Jimi Hendrix and Brian Jones and Mama Cass and all these people. He's telling me this, and I'm saying, well, wait a minute now, Mr. Bocox, you're saying this guy is a murderer? Floyd Bocox says, you tell me, Zach, you tell me. So another article in the can, interesting allegations about Uncle Al. No one's ever heard this story before. What's going on? I go to press with that article, and it seems like it happened on the same day, maybe a few days later. I get a phone call, and it's this elderly Englishman on the other line, and he says, young Zach, how dare you go to print with such terrible information from me about me without consulting me first? I'm probably misquoting him, but that voice, right? And how does he have my number? Who is this guy? And he supposedly killed Brian Jones and Mama Cass and Jimi Hendrix and all these people. But I have to call him back because it's a journalistic code of ethics. You're not supposed to publish slander or libel, So I call him back. I say, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't validate any of it. I just quoted, this Floyd Bocox guy. And he says, Floyd Bocox is a grifter. He's out to make money off Jim's legacy. He's no good, and you shouldn't be giving him any press. So, wow, okay, a whole other angle on this thing. And I'm not going to say that he's right about this. I'm not going to say Floyd Bocox is right about what he says. I'm not going to say anyone's wrong about anything. I just found myself in the position of being in contact with Jim Morrison's former brother-in-law. He was his brother-in-law for 22 years. Wow. By the end of the phone call, he had convinced me to work for him as a ghostwriter. Alan Graham has written the only book about Jim Morrison by an insider of the Morrison family, which is what makes his book really unique. Something most people don't know about the Morrison family is that they were a military bloodline going all the way back to Scottish clan wars. Jim Morrison is literally a descendant of William Wallace or Braveheart. And he was the only scion, which means the first son of that military bloodline, not to go to war, to instead become a rock star. And there are allegations that he was an MK Ultra plant of some sort. I'm not going to say that's the truth because I'm just a speculator. But his father was Admiral Stephen Morrison, who was in command of the boat in the Gulf or the Bay of Tonkin, where that famous incident took place that started the Vietnam War. So there is a strong military governmental connection there to the Morrison family.
Yeah.
And that's just something interesting. You know, I don't know what the truth of that matter is, because I worked for Al Graham for about 20 years. I had plenty of opportunities to ask him that question, but I didn't want to alienate him, and I never got around to asking the question. And whether or not it's the case that Morrison had governmental oversight, Alan Graham, nevertheless, was a noble gentleman, and I was happy to work for him for those 20 to 25 years, and we really made a close connection. And I'll tell you one more detail about him before, and then I'll give it back to you for a while. He also, Alan Graham, worked for Larry Flynt as a fixer in 1983 when Larry Flynt ran for president from the mental ward. He was in the medical center in Springfield, Missouri. He decided to run for president, and he had Alan Graham work as a prankster, essentially, on the outside, scandalizing this Bible Belt community of Springfield, Missouri. Sorry, I'm holding the phone at a weird angle here.
I was just about to say we got like halfy there, but okay, you're good now.
But so another aspect of Alan Graham's legend is he went by Captain Pink for that 6-month period, maybe 6 months, maybe less time that he worked as a fixer for Larry Flynt. He also was party to goings-on at the Hustler Mansion, which was a nerve center for a lot of countercultural types and pop cultural types in the 70s and 80s. So I can tell some stories about that too. And then I have a lot of stories of people that I've interviewed from the punk scene and the rock and roll scene, and talk about writing. I can talk about the Beat Generation, Charles Bukowski, a lot of different writers. I've been talking for a long time. I beg your pardon. It's now your turn.
Oh, you are my guest. So no, the floor is yours. But I do have a question in regards to Alan Graham.
Sure.
All of these other celebrity deaths that he was, implicated in, did you guys ever have a conversation about that?
I feel like that was not true. I feel like it was not true. It never seemed to come up. It never seemed to and there never seemed a hint of it. It never even seemed like he was not talking about one thing or another. It seemed to me it was made up out of whole cloth by Floyd Bocox, but that's just an impression I have, and it makes for an interesting story either way.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So one of the things that you just touched upon, kind of switching gears a little bit, and honestly, when I was going through like your website, it was the thing that kind of most captured me because I knew nothing about it. And it was the Beat Generation, but specifically in Denver. We hear so much about it in regards to San Francisco. So, I mean, that's been talked about over and over again. I knew nothing about it in Denver. So for those who aren't familiar with that, can you just give us a little bit of insight? And I guess what led you to start to write about that?
Well, sure. I discovered Jack Kerouac's writing when I was 15. And the magic thing about the way that guy wrote was he novelized his own experience rather than making up a myth or a narrative, a tale to tell. He treated his own life narrative with the same reverence as one might a work of great art like Moby Dick, for example, just to name any old name. And I started writing books about my life with the same depth of feeling, or writing about my life with that same attitude, that same intent, that same focus when I was a teenager. And when I got to be a little bit older, I discovered a lot of other writers. My style changed greatly, but I continued to hold to that novelization of experience trope in my own case. And I've written a whole bunch of books about my life. Here's one.
Let me make you mic so we can.
Okay. Well, I'll show a few. This one is called Sorehead. There we go, Sorehead. And the latest is Uneasy World. That's a great one. Published an anthology called The Cool World or The Cool Zone. And here's another life novel, ironically titled Happiness. Sorry, guys, I'm not used to screening on the phone. And here's a fiction called Main Character Syndrome. Here's one called There Ain't Nowhere But Here.
Cool.
All right, and so, but the one I want to tell you all about, it's coming up in about 3 months at the outside. It's called Rare But Serious. It's a compilation of all the articles and interviews and essays I've written in the last 25 years to do with countercultural expression, creative expression. So it has interviews on Bukowski, it has interviews on Kerouac. I need to tell you more about the Beat Generation, don't I? I'll get right back to that.
Okay.
In fact, that's where we are. So you've heard about the San Francisco connection. Have you ever heard about Neil Cassady?
Very vaguely. Very vaguely.
So Neil Cassady was fictionalized as Dean Moriarty in Kerouac's first stream of contra or spontaneous prose work. I don't even know if it would qualify as spontaneous prose, but his first beat book anyway, On the Road. Neil Cassady was fictionalized as Dean Moriarty, the real life story of Neil Cassady. He spent most of his childhood and his early part of his youth in Denver, Colorado. He lived in flop houses half the time through his childhood with his father, who was a wino, Dean Sr., and he lived the other half of the time slightly better off in an apartment building called the Snowden with his mother, Maud Jean Scheuer. And my battery's getting low, my temperature's getting high. Hopefully the phone doesn't explode. But Neil Cassady was famous for being a womanizer and for being a car thief. He went to East High School in Denver. They gave him an honorary degree. I think he hardly ever went to class. But the reason Jack Kerouac writes spontaneously, the whole reason for spontaneous prose, was Neil Cassady's personality and the way he expressed his personality when writing a letter to Jack Kerouac called the Joan Anderson Letter, recently republished. Everyone should look for that. And he sort of stormed into Columbia, where all these students were having their mental realities and writing their lives as poets in their minds, but not living their art, not living artistically. And everyone was amazed by Neil Cassady's force of personality. And Kerouac ended up going on the road with him, and he wrote, the book that made him famous, and still resounding in its impact and effect to this day. Pardon me.
Yeah, James here is saying that Neil Cassady drove the Merry Pranksters bus.
He did go on to drive the Merry Pranksters bus in 1964, I guess it was, because Ken Kesey, he sought out Ken Kesey. He was living in that part of California, and he sought out Ken Kesey, started hanging around with everybody at Kesey's house, and when Kesey had the idea to go on the road, what better driver?
Good point. Very interesting. So I want to be respectful of your phone in regards to your battery being low. So I want to make sure we cover all of the things.
It wasn't the battery. It just said the temperature was getting high, but then it stopped saying that. So.
Okay,
Might be
good.
okay.
Good. So for those who quickly, just very quickly, who don't know, like Jim does here, James does, about the Merry Pranksters bus. What very briefly, what was that?
So Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, before LSD was made illegal, he decided to have a traveling road show where he would give people LSD and let them experiment with it and understand what it was and learn to be with it and sort of be affected and influenced and grow through it. And it was called the acid tests, and his gang of friends and compatriots was called the Merry Pranksters. And they called their bus Further because that was the destination, and the masthead on the front of it, Further, just the edge far out. And that's who the Merry Pranksters were. Maybe most moderns don't have that association with Kesey, but that was probably his strongest association in the 60s.
Gotcha.
Sibilance.
So we kind of briefly touched upon the Beat generation in Denver. I know we transitioned from there into your new work coming out, but again, we all know about the, Beat generation in San Francisco, but what makes the Denver scene different, or is it completely similar?
Well, I would say in Denver you can sort of see how it's evolved in one form, because there used to be coffee houses where they would read poetry in Denver back when Neil Cassidy was ditching East High in the early 40s, I guess it would have been. And that was strongly present in Denver. I guess you could still say there's a couple of them, but there used to be so many coffee houses in Denver. And when in the 90s, when I was 19, 18, and like through my 20s, I hosted a number of coffee house poetry readings, spoken word readings. And I called myself Henry Alarm Clock because I wanted to be a punk rock poet. And in the 90s, that was something really wonderful about Denver. In the 90s, all the creative camps would congregate in coffee houses. So, like musicians, writers, comedians, actors, they would all be hanging out in the coffee houses, and everyone had a friend or two in every camp. And that, I would say, that kind of creative unity has rather diffused in Denver in the last maybe 20 years. But there's still a core of close-knit creatives.
Okay.
And to your point, I don't know if they're really beats anymore, but as you trace the lineage, that was definitely the origin of what is currently going on, or what was going on as recently as the 90s in Denver, and probably still continues to go on in random pockets.
Yeah. That's so cool that you had your own like poetry. I like that
Oh, it was
description
a
of what you were
dream.
trying to do.
It was definitely a dream. I mean, in the best of ways. I don't mean
Yeah,
that's real, but it was wonderful. It was Wonderland.
that's very cool. So I know that you wanted to talk about subconscious fiction.
Oh
And
yeah,
before we get into that, for people who don't know what that is, can you just briefly explain what that is and why that you wanted to discuss that?
sure. Well, I don't know. Did I say that I wanted to? I'm happy to. Um, when I discovered spontaneous prose as a mid in my mid-teens, I just got all the way into it and started writing spontaneously. But even so, for all those years, I never felt like I had really mastered it. I had really like attained that ability. So it's a funny story. I ended up going to grad school in Vermont at this magic school where they gave you credit for studying whatever you wanted to, as long as you could demonstrate that you were studying something and learning about it by reporting monthly in voluminous packets of reportage. Um,
Interesting.
so let's see, where am I going with this? So I joined, after I graduated from Vermont College, I joined a writing group that was started by one of my classmates called 5 Minute Mornings. So the idea is to write very quickly every morning, And I don't keep a regular schedule, so I didn't do it in the morning. And I didn't do it like most people. I just thought, well, okay, I'm part of this group. I'm going to write something spontaneously and end with a bang or end with a joke. Like everything I write is going to end with some kind of, well, I guess it began, I would end everything as a joke. And it developed a little bit beyond that, but it stayed essentially humorous at its core, in its essence. And I found that all I needed was a prompt, and I was able to write spontaneously to my satisfaction a little fictive gesture in response to any prompt you gave me, and I would be pleased with it. And the magic trick of it all was that I wasn't writing about my life. I wasn't writing about myself at all. It didn't have an ego component to it whatsoever beyond just this half idea to end on a joke, like a half and more of an intent than a plan to end on a humorous point. And I guess I learned, like, oh my God, I've learned how to write without ego. And I was just amazed, so amazed by it, that I started calling it subconscious fiction. And I've published a few books of that stuff, but I feel like I'm just now getting to like the greatness of it. But every writer probably always feels that way about their latest book,
Yeah. So how many books have you written in total?
Wow, I would say about 15.
That's
And you
incredible.
can find most of them at Amazon. And I'd say about 12 of them are pretty high quality.
Nice. That is
And look
incredible.
who's
That is a
talking.
lot. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, well, I think it's all out there. It's all out there. I think it's enjoyable, and I hope that it's presented in a gift-giving manner. I mean, I hope it has the effect on people of making them happy, making them enjoy what they're reading, and what they want to write about themselves, and that have that kind of effect overall.
Yeah. So your new book that will be coming out, you briefly said earlier it's like a compilation of what you've done in the last like 20 plus years. Can you give a little bit more information on that, or
Yeah,
is it going to
so
be held behind, secret thing, wait till the book comes out?
no, I'll happily summarize it for you. Um, let's say it starts. I used to be Henry Alarm Clock, right? I used to host a lot of spoken word readings. Then I took a long break from that activity, and I started hosting readings again at my favorite coffee house in Denver, Mutiny Info Cafe. Remember that name? And I started hosting a lot of a variety show there for a few years. One day, okay, this kid started coming to the variety show, and he was the most countercultural type that had shown up at the variety show. He wore wings like butterfly, not butter. I don't know. I think they were like bee wing. Maybe they were butterfly wings, and antennas, and a little skirt. And he played guitar. And he called himself Krishup. I shouldn't have said that. He had a name. He had a name that was a contraction of his first and last name. He was just the most whacked out, far out type. And I had just written a book on the beats in Denver, and I used the word countercultural or counterculture in some context. And this kid says, "What's a counterculture? Is that terrorism?" So I thought, wow, nobody knows what that word means anymore. I should write a book talking about what it means. So it traces my experience of creativity, which was always a countercultural type of an experience, all the way from the Kerouac inception and all the things peripheral to Kerouac, like Bukowski and jazz and Aram Saroyan, William Saroyan, rather, John Fonte, all the writers of the 40s, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, traces that through the 60s. I have interviews with Ken Babbs. He's one of the Merry Pranksters. I have interviews with Lee Kornstrom and Paul Krasner. They were all Merry Prankster adjacent. And I have interviews with Jamie Cassidy, Neil Cassidy's daughter. I have interviews with Robert Hyatt, Neil Cassidy's son. So it traces through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. And then Oh, I haven't told you about the Michael Channels interview yet. You know who that is, right? That was my second free citizen journalism project. I have 10 more minutes. If you have 10 more minutes, I have at least.
Please go ahead.
Okay, you know who Michael Channels is.
Yes,
So
back porch tapes.
my second freelance or citizen journalism experiment was to write an article about Charles Manson and the way that convicts are state property and that the state has the, I think, legal right and certainly the presumed ability to market their image. And that goes into the story about Eileen Wuornos and how they made all those movies about her life and how she even claimed that the whole thing was a setup just to make movies. I'm not going to say that's true, but she said it. So I wrote an article about that and how many books have been written about him. And because that often comes up when you read interviews with Manson, he often complains about the author, and then, they were just telling their story, what they wanted to be true, things like that. And I will take a moment to say Nicholas Schreck is the most trusted, I would say the most trusted tender keeper of Manson's legacy that I can think of. And I give him creds in the book in that article. I wrote an article about the fight over Manson's will, and I think Nicholas Schreck, I'm sure, has a far more up-to-date and correct overview of that situation. But I wrote that article, and I provided a little updating of it, and an asterisk at the bottom, and I put a little picture of Nicholas Schreck's book, and I recommended that. But I talked about the fight over Manson's will and all the different claimants, one of whom was Michael Channels. I was happy to receive, I was gratified by his agreeance to let me interview him, my second citizen journalism article. And I talked to him about his friendship with Manson. And I actually got, I don't know if this was related or not, but I sent an email to Manson. I got an interview from Manson, which I also folded into that article about his will. And that's, I think, in the first third of the book. Okay. So that's what, and I have one more true crime connection for you that isn't in the book, but you've heard of the Black Dahlia and you've heard of Steve Hodel, probably?
Yes.
I think he would like to appear on one of your true crime shows. It's just a guess, but I'd be happy to give you an email to contact him and ask about that.
Sure. So did you write about the Black Dahlia in your book?
No, it didn't make it into this book, but I have interviewed Steve Hodel, and there's an interview with him. I think it's in Where's Cop, and it was published in Please Kill Me.
Gotcha. Okay. Oh, I love all those connections. Oh my goodness. So yeah, and for everybody that follows the Charles Manson case, we know that the fight over his estate is still in progress, but yeah. So well, that's great that you were able to connect with Michael Channels, and yeah, Nick. I've had Nick on a show here before.
Yeah, I think that was the first episode I saw of your show.
Oh, good to know. So before we kind of wind things down, I want to make sure that we've touched upon everything that you wanted to touch upon. And then we'll take a couple of minutes. If anybody who's watching in the chat has any questions for Zack, please let me know and we can ask them. But Zack, yes, any other points that we might have missed that you wanted to make sure that we talk about tonight?
I just want to apologize to all the viewers for my tardiness, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I hope I've been entertaining and informative and watchable and likable for you all.
I can answer that right now. Yes, and yes.
All right. Well, it's certainly been an honor.
So let's see. No, just James Watson is commenting that he's been wanting a Dahlia episode forever.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah. Okay, James Watson, good to know, good to know. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat while we're also waiting on that. So I know you said that people can find your books on Amazon. Where else can people find you on social media or whatnot? Where are you located?
I'm at Facebook. I just Camp Elasticity just got a page on Blue Sky. CampElasticity.com is the website for my production company, mostly publications, and I'm getting into short films, and we host podcasts. And I'm on Instagram, and I said Facebook already, LinkedIn. I think that's all of them.
Okay, and in the drop down bar, I did also put the link for those for as many as that I could find as well. So if people just want
Thank
to
you.
click that, it will bring you straight to you. So PJ says, thanks for being here. Wolf asks a question. What are your thoughts on the death penalty for intense crimes that could warrant that?
I don't know. Like what kind of? I don't know. I don't think I want to be on the side of the death penalty. So I'll have to give that a pass. I don't know what kind of. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a very vengeful type.
That is a fair answer. Capone. Okay, this is a typical Capone question. Favorite Denver dive bar?
Wow, I can't. Oh boy, I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, I think it might be called the. I'm probably wrong. It's on Colfax. I think it's called the Nob Hill Inn. That's what it's called. All right, the Nob Hill Inn. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's the diviest. And let me say, the favorite bar would be my brother's bar.
Nice shout outs right there. Nice shout outs for people who are in the area.
Cool.
So quickly, and this is totally off of my notes here, but so I don't know if you're familiar with CrimeCon, but CrimeCon is actually next September, so 2025 is actually coming to Denver, Colorado.
Oh wow.
They're hosting it, yeah.
Are you going to be coming?
I am.
All right, we'll have to get together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's think of, for people that don't know what CrimeCon is, the best way I can describe it is think of Comic-Con for people who are into comic books, but crime. So there's just anything
serial killer culture.
I mean, yeah, there will be some like presentations,
Just
and
crime
that
culture.
some presenters do, like former FBI agents or people who worked certain cases. That there's a lot. It's a good positive thing. I think sometimes it gets a bad rap, but for people who are into true crime and actually wanting to make a difference in it, it's a great place for networking. So, but yeah, we'll be in Denver next year.
Well, that's great. Look me up.
Yeah, you'll keep in touch on that for sure. Let's see. Capone says, yes, Nob Hill plays classical music outside to keep people moving along.
That's it. That's the one.
That's so cool that you knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. All right.
And the Satire Lounge is also a good one.
Satire Lounge. Okay. Good to know. Capone, Capone is quite the traveler, so yeah. Let's see. Rest in peace, 15th Street Tavern.
Yeah. I saw Gold Bordello there once. It was great. Walked around on the tables. It was before they were famous, before they had any hits.
Oh, goodness. All right, Zach. Well, thank you so much for coming on Dani After Dark. I really appreciate it. And where we already went over where people can find your books. Any idea of when your newest book will be out?
I was told 6 to 8 weeks, and that was about a week and a half ago. And I'm about to start the publishing, like the intensive part of the publishing process, in about a week. So I would say 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks. And it's called Rare But Serious, Art Interviews, Articles, and Occasional Prose.
Awesome. Well, that will be going in my Amazon cart right away as soon as it is able
Right
to.
on.
Tell you that right now, that's for sure. Okay. Virginia Woolf snuck in with one other question. Do you ever dream about true crime stuff? If so, could you tell us if that's so?
Dream. Well, I write a lot. My spontaneous prose tends to go there, but it's not true crime. It tends to go to like outlawry, adventure, and decadence, and squalor, things like that. But not so much. I should have talked more about Manson. Manson is really my true crime button. And I wanted to talk a little more about Paul is Dead. Are you running out of time, though? We're probably
No, we
almost.
can go from if your battery on your cell phone is good, I am good to go. Oh no, hold on, you got muted. Hold on. So you accidentally muted yourself.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, yeah. So I was a huge Beatles fan as a little kid, and I remember when I was the kind of kid who would read books about everything. So I was reading a book about the Beatles. I was about 9 years old. I came to the chapter about the Manson connection. I thought, oh my God, I never knew the Beatles had anything to do with this, right? And it was so in depth. It was such a touchstone for because the Beatles were so influential and so all pervasive in their effects, and to have something so like ostensibly horrible wrapped up so intimately with this wonderful pop, beauty love generation thing really tripped me out. I remember listening to Revolution 9 Revolution 9 and reading that chapter in Philip Norman's Shout, the first Beatles book I ever read about the Manson family. And I've always had this lingering kind of fascination with that particular story, even though on the scale of murders, it wasn't the biggest murder. There's a whole lot unknown. There's a whole lot untold. There's a backstory that's never shown. It's just a fascinating story, and I've always been sort of integrally connected with the weirdness of that whole Manson story. Um, and I wanted, okay, and so something else weird about the Beatles is the whole Paul is dead myth, right? And most people think that was just a fleeting conspiracy in 1968 and it was easily debunked and there was nothing to it. But there's actually a book been written called The Memoirs of Billy Shears. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
Encoded by a man named Thomas E. Harriet. It gives every impression, every indication of having been dictated by Billy Shears, William Shepard, who replaced Paul McCartney in 1966, who may in fact be the son of Aleister Crowley, of all people, which would make him the brother of Barbara Bush, of all people. And it's just kind of interesting the way this guy keeps on, putting out records and going on shows and stuff. And he's in his late 80s. And I'm not going to say this is true, but I'm very interested to see if there's a near-death confession or to see what becomes of the Paul is dead myth post-mortem. And that's a little relevant probably to the usual listeners here. Look for a book called The Memoirs of Billy Shears, and it will be by Thomas E. Harriet. It's on Amazon. Fascinating book, hard to deny, hard to discount, but I'm not going to say it's true. I'm an intermediatist. If you're interested in what that means, look up Charles Fort. Basically just means no singular truth. Everyone has something to offer on this circle we call the truth. The truth is always moving, and depending on your perspective, it's going to look different.
Interesting. Yeah, this audience is very very into true crime, very into the Manson case, as Capone saying, yeah, we're all into that. I just wanted to add, so James comment, he's a big fan of the Beats, the Beat generation. Wolf is adding, yeah, Paul is dead.
All right.
He says that you're fascinating.
Oh, thank you so much. I know I'm the odd man out, and I'm so grateful to you, Dani, for having me on your platform and letting me espouse my stuff.
Absolutely. Anytime, anytime. So, all right. Well, I think that's a great segment to wind things down, so people know where to find you. Again, I put all that information in the drop down bar below. We know when roughly your new book is coming out, so everybody stay tuned for that.
Rare but serious.
Yes, and I will be getting that. I'm telling you that right now. So keep an eye out. Keep an eye out. I will be getting that. And yeah, again, if anytime you want to come on, I know you have a million stories, so I would love to at a later point, have you back on and we can kind of deep dive into that. So, all right. Well, thank you again, Zack, for joining me here at Dani After Dark. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week, and remember, until next time, everybody, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.